This is your Chargers linebacker, Dan Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, like you said yesterday in your tweet, it feels like it's been forever since we have watched Chargers football. In reality, it's only been 2 weeks. The Chargers coming off their Week 5 bye. Still with a lot of question marks, kind of when we went into the bye. Still have some injury issues to address. Obviously, as it relates to scoring offense issues, needs to be addressed. And overall, this is the first time that we are going to see a Jim Harbaugh-led team coming off of a bye against a very tough divisional opponent in the Denver Broncos. Despite what many people may think of them offensively, defensively, they have been absolutely lights out. So it's going to be an interesting divisional affair. And as it relates to the AFC West, you cannot afford to lose any more divisional games when you have the Kansas City Chiefs running away with the division as it stands right now at 5-0. But Dan Wolkenstein, plenty of things to get into as it relates to the latest injury stats, or status, the top storylines as it relates to this game, the matchup previews. We're going to delve into all of it. But before we do that, sir, how are you?
Jake, I'm good. It has been way too long since we've seen a Chargers game, and I'm so
84 years.
Yes. Shout out to Rose from Titanic. I am so ready to see what this Chargers coaching staff has in store for this team coming off a bye. First bye week we've seen under Jim Harbaugh and company. Lots of frustrations and question marks and things that we've all seen. Also, things that we've been excited for and see if it continues. But for this matchup, I'm trying to warn Chargers fans who are going into this just assuming that because they're going up against a Bo Nix offense that this Broncos team is going to lose. Don't do it. As good as this Chargers defense is, the crazy part is the Broncos defense is better. And as bad as Bo Nix's offense has been, the unfortunate part is this Chargers offense has been worse, led by Justin Herbert and company, which we'll get into that too. So please take this game seriously. Even at full strength, this Broncos defense is legit and this Chargers offense is not. So let's keep it real, but we'll talk about all the predictions and matchups, all that stuff, like Jake said. But man, I'm so happy to get back into this. Got a bunch of slides here for folks who are watching, so you got some fun things in store. But Jake, before we get to all of it, tell the fans how you are, and then tell the fans about our good friends. Let's pay the bills.
Good. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword because, you have a bye week off and you're like, okay, I can relax. I know I'm not going to be stressed out this afternoon. This is fine. This is great watching some of these other teams. I get to kick my feet up. I get to, if it's your type of fancy, have yourself an alcoholic beverage, that's great. Enjoy the Sunday. But then you get back to it and you're like, damn, what was the last episode that we were on?
Yeah,
where did we leave off with all of this?
Lost.
The Chiefs still haven't lost. That's the team that you went limping into the bye, losing against 2 weeks ago. And as Dan said, there are plenty of questions that need to be answered, addressed, and how is this offense going to look now that Jim Harbaugh has had this bye week to reassess, go back to the drawing board, understand what hasn't been working, how they're going to maximize it moving forward. It's going to be an interesting topic to get into, not just for this game, Dan, but in moving forward for the rest of the season. But as Dan said, before we get into everything, I want to remind everybody that BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. You think you know your stuff? Get in on a 200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200K. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head on over to the website today. That's betonline.ag to get in on the action. BetOnline, the game starts here. See there, Dan? I even fumbled the ad read. That's what a bye week apparently does to me. So obviously I'm not coming out of the bye week strong. I need to toughen up here in the next hour or so.
Hey, well, competitors will be welcome in this episode, and so will the stats and numbers and graphics. So we got a lot here for you because I think it's a good time to reset the table and see where this Chargers team is as we go up against the Week 6 Denver Broncos. And so I talked about it at the top, Jake. We got a couple screens here just to kind of kick this thing off. Both defenses are looking good. This first view we're looking at here is EPA per play on dropbacks and rushing EPA. You see the Chargers and Broncos way up there in the top right. Looking pretty good with the Minnesota Vikings, who, by the way, Minnesota Vikings undefeated. Now, compare that to what the offense side of looks like. A little different. They're both on the left. Broncos way on the left when it comes to dropback EPA per play. I think they're 5th worst. Chargers aren't that far behind. I think they're 7th maybe. But dropback, rushing EPA per play, both are kind of in the average range. So again, offensive-wise, both left a lot to be desired. Defense humming, which we'll get to some more stats later. But that doesn't tell the full story here. And again, the Chargers, we're all kind of used to seeing this Chargers team and give excuses, but the injuries do matter. And there is context there from the Chargers offensive side specifically. Combine that with kind of the lack of cohesion, combine that with the 3 sides of the right side of the offensive line, all new, then add injuries to the left tackle as well with Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater both going out. It makes for a recipe for disaster of a team that is new to a scheme, trying to impose their will on the running game that doesn't have the horses to do it. On top of that, what makes it even worse is when they don't execute pre-snap. The amount of false starts, horrendous. Then post-snap, holdings. You just can't do some of this stuff if you're trying to win with an offense that is hobbled. So to look at the offensive side of the ball for the Chargers versus the defense for the Broncos, because again, this Broncos defense is good. And so how would you kind of set the table for the offense of LA versus the juggernaut of Denver?
It's interesting, Dan, because you start going through to say, like, okay, where am I going to attack this Denver Broncos defense? First of all, along the line in total, Denver has 22 sacks on the seasons through 5 weeks. It's pretty damn good. Virtually everybody along their line is figuring out ways to produce. You go to the secondary, damn, it's an even worse story in the secondary. Not only do you have Patrick Surtain, who's obviously going to blanket anybody, but now you have Riley Moss that is emerging for them as another standout secondary opponent. Dan, I'm going to give you some names here. DK Metcalf, George Pickens, Mike Evans, Garrett Wilson.
I bet they're not doing good going up against Surtain.
Not one of them had a game over 50 yards this season when they went up against the Denver Broncos. So how are you going to be able to move the ball down the field? Well, first of all,
good luck.
Whether we're talking in the passing game or in the running game, having your offensive line back to full strength is obviously a huge positive for the Chargers in this circumstance. You have to get back to establishing your dominance along the trenches. The Chargers are going to have to figure out a way. This was another big question with them heading into the bye over the last half against Pittsburgh and obviously the game against Kansas City. Figure out a way to stay ahead of the sticks. Put yourself in third and short situations so that you can keep the defense honest. Whether or not you're going to be...
First and 10 would be great.
Sure. You have to find a way to do this. Dan, I think this is another great opportunity for Ladd McConkey in terms of how he's going to be utilized. I think that not only are they going to look to get him the ball, but I think that he's going to be the one really that's going to have the opportunity to have the most targets, catches, whatever you want to say, because Patrick Surtain is obviously either going to take Joshua Palmer or Quentin Johnson out of this game. And however Denver wants to mix their secondary up in terms of who they're going to cover is going to be interesting. But again, I think this is another game if we're talking about over the middle, that in the passing game, Ladd should be able to succeed. You're probably going to see a lot of 12 personnel from the Chargers. So how are you going to involve these tight ends? I liked a little bit of what they were doing in that first drive against Kansas City and getting your running backs and your tight ends involved in more screen passes. But overall, Dan, as we said last week or 2 weeks ago after that Kansas City loss, everything in Jim Harbaugh's offense in terms of how it produces right now as it stands in terms of what we've seen over the past 2 weeks still revolves around the running game being the dominant force first. That's going to set the pace for everything else that you're going to be able to do. Is this going to be a game that where you're going to have to rely on Justin Herbert's arm? Certain situations, yes, but this is not going to be a high-level game for Justin Herbert to go out there and sling it, not against this defense. No, sir. So you're going to have to be really calculated about how you're going to attack this defense because they can beat you in so many different ways. Dan, we'll talk about the Broncos offense here in a second. But this defense it gave up 26 points in week 1. It has not given up more than 18 since. They really tightened the screws over their last 4 games. So their defense is keeping them in games, and ultimately, if it's close, they win them games.
So this might be a bit of a humble pie for Chargers fans. And again, Jake, I think this season something happened and we've switched roles here. But when I say this is good on bad, that might not even do it justice for how good the Broncos offense is versus how bad the Chargers offense has been. Excuse me, Denver's defense versus Chargers offense. I'm going to give you some numbers here do you want bad or good first? What would you like?
Let's harken back to pessimistic Jake and give me the bad news first.
Okay, this is great. All right, Chargers offense, total yards per game, 29th. Passing yards, 136 passing yards per game. That's 31st. Points per game, 28th, just 17. You know how many plays per drive they have? 5. That's dead last in the NFL. Yards per drive, they're 29th. Red zone percentage, resulting in a touchdown, 26th. The only thing that they're kind of good at, I mean, rushing yards per game, they're at 128. That's 9th best. Okay. They've given up 2 sacks total, which is 20th. Excuse me, 2 sacks per game, which is 20th in the NFL. Now, 20 doesn't sound great, but considering like where the Chargers are at offensive line-wise, that seems like a miracle. That seems like a miracle, considering they don't have a left tackle or a right tackle. 3/5 of the offensive line was new to begin with. They can't run the ball. They can't pass. Like, that's tough. All of those things are bad. And again, some of that is what's happened previously. Some of that is because of injuries. Some of that is execution. A lot of that is Greg Roman and scheme. There's a lot there. You're hoping that injuries that have become now health impact this. Joe Alt is now practicing. I think Rashawn Slater is now practicing off to the side. You're seeing, I don't think we've seen DJ Chark yet, but I think he's close. So offensive-wise, you're hoping to see that next step from the offensive line, one, and then Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins as well. Now, most importantly, Justin Herbert is now 2 weeks removed from a game and will be almost 100%, according to, I think it was Ian Rappaport talked about it this morning. So you're hoping that health and the bye week turns this team around. That's really kind of the hope, right? And that they can get this team crisper. You can see the crispiness, according to Jim Harbaugh, shine through. Which, Jake, I'm so glad to hear that the coaching staff is echoing the things that I was saying, and they're not using the injuries as the excuse, because they were not crisp and they were ineffective at staying fundamentally sound. And that's what bothered me. So a bunch of bad for the Chargers offense. And you pair that, Jake, going up against the Denver defense, which, again, everybody says this Denver defense is good, but no one talks about how good, right? 3rd best yards per game allowed. 5th best in yards after the catch allowed per game. 2nd most blitz percentage. Vance Joseph is absolute maniac. 3rd most sacks per game. 3rd highest pressure percentage. 6th fewest missed tackles per game. 2nd most quarterback knockdown percentage. And 2nd most quarterback hits. And oh, by the way, 2nd fewest points allowed per game at just 14.6. So when I say good versus bad, that's no hyperbole, and it probably doesn't do it justice. A Chargers offense that has Justin Herbert at the helm should not be 31st in the NFL in passing yards per game. I don't care how balanced you're trying to be. Period. I told you, humble pie, pessimistic side coming out.
I believe there was some good news. You said that there was coming, or was that just
the good news was the good news was that they ranked 20th in sacks per game.
Oh, okay, that was the good news.
That was the good.
I was just waiting for it.
That was the good. The good was they're only 20th, given all that craziness, and they are getting healthy, coming off a bye, able to regroup. That's the good of the offense. Like,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Throw us in the comment, please. Like, let me know what I'm missing here.
But I don't think that you're missing everything. Why it may seem that I am somewhat speechless about anything, I really just don't have anything to add. Honestly, that's how good that defense is. Say everything that you want about the offense and not being able to produce, and we'll get into that in a second, but it does not matter. It's interesting because both of these teams, Dan, really kind of follow a similar philosophy. They have an attacking defense, which the Chargers, still despite what they've done in the last 2 weeks, still ranks pretty damn good as it relates to defenses. You're going to get Derwin James back for this game. Mm-hmm. But it's still an offense where they know that they want to run the ball, and their defense is going to keep things close and ultimately, especially if you're in Denver in certain circumstances, win you the game. And so you have very interesting, similar ideologies between head coaches and game plans and what they ultimately want to execute.
Somewhat.
Yes,
I'll get to this
exactly
in a bit.
The same.
I'll get to
exactly the same.
But they get to it in different ways. Like, for example, the pressure percentages and things, quarterback hits, all that jazz, way lower for the Chargers than it is for the Broncos. But end result, yards per game, points per game, both similar. They get there different ways. But to your point, large picture, yes, similar.
Yes. So you mentioned accountability from Jim Harbaugh. You go back and you listen to his press conference. It sounded like he and the rest of the staff understood a lot of the issues that they've had, especially when it comes to scoring points in the second half, which is something that has gone away from the Chargers the last 2 games. They need to figure out how to, I mentioned, not only stay ahead of the sticks, but build up a lead to where you have to force Denver when they're on offense for Bo Nix to beat you. You have to figure out a way to do that. If this game remains close,
it's like the Steelers game.
Yeah, it's going to be tough, which, again, I think that this game is going to be a low-scoring affair as it currently stands. And do I think it's going to end up being close? Sure. But if you're looking for one of these type of wins where you can start taking a breather mid-fourth quarter, I don't know if you're going to see that if the Chargers are not able to rectify some of these things that have eluded them in the past from an offensive game plan standpoint.
No, they kind of come at you from from multitude of ways. You know, Jonathan Cooper, Zach Allen, Nick Bonito all have 3 or more sacks. From a tackle for loss perspective, Zach Allen, Jonathan Cooper lead the way. Quarterback hits, same thing. 12 for Zach Allen, 9 for Jonathan Cooper. You know, interceptions, obviously you saw Patrick Surtain with the pick 6. Riley Moss has been good this year so far. Their secondary is legit. So you're in for a tough game. You're in for a tough game, even fully healthy. And I'm so tired of the excuses. And again, new me, right? New me. I'm sorry, Chargers fans, but oh, they went up against a good Steelers defense. Oh, they went up against a good Chiefs defense. Oh, they went up. Guys, you can't just play victim every time you go up against a good team. Good teams can go up against good teams and still win. We can't have that mentality. So, case in point, that Chiefs game, they went up against a good Chiefs defense. Oh, we were injured. Once you get into the game, if they executed like they should have, they would have won. When you have a quarterback like Justin Herbert and a head coach like Jim Harbaugh and a defensive coordinator like the man that he is, Jesse Minter, you don't have that many legit excuses before you start looking in the mirror of, is Greg Roman the problem? Are the players the problem? Is the coaching the problem? And I'm sorry to put some, I don't know, wet towels on top of the vibes right now, but this is kind of a put-up game for this Chargers offense. I know this Denver defense is good. That doesn't mean you have an excuse to be bad again. You can rise to the challenge and impose your will. That's the whole point of Jim Harbaugh and his philosophy.
Before we transition to the Chargers defense versus the Broncos offense, this is somewhat enlightening and gratifying for me at the same time. Given the opportunity to literally watch Dan Wolkenstein have a meltdown and have this turn for his villain arc. First of all, gives me perspective on what he had to listen to me for 3.5 years sounding like. But also the fact of who is now leading this team at the head coaching position. That Dan, this just shows you how loyal Dan Wolkenstein is. Dan stood by with his optimistic hat on for 3.5 years with all of the plethora of issues that the Chargers had from a coaching perspective, from a personnel perspective, from a front office perspective. For 3.5 years, he did that. And we are now going into week 6.
Broke me.
We are now going into week 6 of the Jim Harbaugh era in his first year back as a head coach. And Dan Wolkenstein is literally just ready to, I don't know what he's ready to do. It kind of scares me, but it makes me laugh at the same time to watch this, because I want to say it's about time, but I'm also ready to say, oh, this is what it was like.
Yeah, and again, I know that was a really long negative tangent, and I apologize.
Yeah, but thanks for getting everybody up for Sunday's game.
Yeah, awesome. Wet mop. No, but I say that because I think it's important to not take for granted that they're going up against a rookie quarterback in a Denver Broncos team that wasn't expected to be good going into the season. So I think they need their just respect, and I think the Chargers need their fair criticism. Sure. And hopefully we can see some of those questions answered this week. Can they establish some semblance of a passing game that's consistent? Can they stay ahead of the sticks, to your point, Jake? Can they keep a drive alive with more than just 5 plays per drive, dead last in the NFL? Can they score in the red zone? These are all unanswered questions going into week 6. But if we're looking at the last 5 weeks, including the bye, the answer to those questions on the whole are no. Can that change? I hope. Flipping over. Chargers defense, Denver offense. And you heard a lot of Chargers fans talk about how excited they were for Jim Harbaugh. And, oh no, what if we were to have had Sean Payton? And there's a whole thing of a year later. And as much as we want to talk about the Broncos being a winning team now, 3-2, Bo Nix isn't that great. And you want to talk about a quarterback whisperer, like, I don't think this is really the season yet to say, oh, look, see, just like Drew Brees, Bo Nix is balling. Like, that's not quite it. Make no mistake about it. They're winning because their defense is legit. They're not winning because their offense isn't good. Period. And again, good on bad. Chargers defense good, Broncos offense bad. Jake, what say you about this side?
You know, we talked about, Dan, and I thought you were going to get to it there in terms of coaches and, you know, retrospective a year later. You got to give, I mean, we gave the flowers to Jesse Minter last week, even in a loss against Kansas City. Anytime that you hold Kansas City's offense, even if the way that they're playing right now isn't the best, anytime that you hold that team to 17 points, given the amount of players that did not play that week,
true,
that was a testament to something. I'm not sure if you got a chance to listen to Jesse Minter during this week as far as his press conferences goes, but he wasn't ready to accept the flowers, not by any means. This was his quote that he had after the defensive performance against Kansas City. He said, "I don't take satisfaction out of any loss. You either win or you lose. I don't go back after games and say, well, we played them tough. There's no moral victories with Jesse Minter."
This sounds familiar.
And then he finished with, "I'm pleased with how our guys are playing from a mentality standpoint, but we're chasing winning football for 4 quarters. That doesn't sound like a coach that's complacent. That doesn't sound like a coach that's even relatively happy with how his players have been playing. Even the fact that they've been very impressive through their first 4 games of this year.
Remember how many Chargers fans were talking about that moral victory after that Chiefs loss?
Which, again, you can have that. I mean, I still think it is impressive given the fact of who you didn't have on both sides of the ball, and you were still able to keep that game for as close as it was. So we can have our moral victories. That's fine. But I feel like against Kansas City, I feel like we've had 26 straight moral victories, and we're kind of getting sick of it. I totally get that. So from Jesse Minter's standpoint, I'm excited to see how he's going to come back after 2 tough losses with this defense.
Yeah.
And I would hope that that type of mentality has translated to the offense as well, to say, look, your defense is keeping you in these games for you to possibly tie it, take the game over offensively, whatever it is that you need to do. They're keeping them in the games. The defense is the best part of this Chargers team as it stands right now, which is saying something considering that you have number 10 on the opposite side of the ball. So how are you going to do this against Bo Nix? Dan, here's some stats as it relates to Bo Nix. He has had 45 passes travel 10 or plus more yardage through the air. We're just talking air yards here. 45 passes traveling 10 or more yards through the air. You want to know how many of those that he's completed?
I'm going to go way less than half.
It's 11.
Oh, it's like a quarter.
It's 11. Again, much like the Chargers, they're going to look to pound the rock, dictate the pace as it relates to their offense, putting their rookie quarterback in a much more manageable 3rd and short situation if it comes to that. They run a lot of 12 personnel. They actually utilize their tight ends a lot in their passing game. Courtland Sutton has had a number of different targets, but the stats don't tell you that he's having this all big-time season. So it's the points for the Broncos is not coming from that standpoint. So how do you find the ways to shut them down? Defensively, you obviously need to be putting Bo Nix in 3rd and long situations. You do that, I feel like you can put him into a situation where he's going to be making mistakes. You need to clamp down the middle of the field. And I would hope from the standpoint of everything the way that it looks right now in terms of the slot goes, it looks like Tarheeb's still maybe seeing his second start of the game, considering that Jasir Taylor looks like he may be going in the wrong direction for his injury status. You're going to obviously need to lock that up with Deion Henley and the rest of that linebacker core.
Junior Wilson, who's now looking to be back as well.
You're really going to have to manage the middle of the field. On top of that, Dan, you hopefully, obviously we know we're getting Derwin James back, which is a huge boost as it relates to this defense. You're hopefully going to have Joey Bosa back because in the situation that they went up against Kansas City, they essentially had Justin Ebogbe as the 4th edge rusher, but they really weren't using him that much coming off the edge to replace that. So they went with a number of different formations in terms of what Jesse Minter wanted to do. So you hopefully have your full complement of edge rushers in there. And then how are you going to get penetration up the middle? Dan, there is a weakness to this Broncos offense that's not Bo Nix, and that is their offensive line. They are banged up. You can find ways to exploit this.
Look, the weird part about this, and you mentioned kind of the Joey Bosa effect, not having him. And some of this is because of not having Joey Bosa, but some of it is just kind of wild. But for as good as this Chargers defense has been so far, they're 29th in hurry percentage, 28th in pressures, and 32nd in quarterback knockdown percentage. Dead last. But still, best in the NFL in points per game. 5th best yards per game. 6th best rushing yards allowed per game. 5th best passing yard. Like, they're still there. But without that pressure percentage, they're still only 2.75 sacks per game, which compared to the 29th and 30th and 32nd numbers, 2.75 per game in sacks actually ranks 13th in the NFL. So they're not getting that much pressure, but given those numbers, they're actually getting to the quarterback quite well at the times that they can. So this is where I was saying the Chargers and Broncos defense get to the same place, but in different ways. Broncos defense pressures the hell out of the quarterback, blitzes like crazy. Chargers defense does not, and they win with their front, and they win with their secondary, and they hope to be able to tackle well. So, and this is the sad part here, Jake, is the Chargers offense and the Broncos offense. If I just took out the team logos, you wouldn't know which one's which. And that is so demoralizing as a Chargers fan watching like Justin Herbert of years past. Broncos offense, total yards per game, 28th, 271 yards per game. Again, Chargers offense, remember, 29th. So Broncos offense, total yards, better than the Chargers. Passing yards per game, Broncos offense, 28th in the NFL. Chargers, 31st in the NFL. Broncos offense, better. Rushing yards per game, the Broncos are 21st, so not great. Okay, that's where the Chargers do have a win there. Third down percentage, Broncos offense is terrible. 24.6% of the time they convert third downs. That's 31st. That's second worst in the NFL. If they can continue that, they're good. The Broncos offense revolves around Courtland Sutton, like you said. And then after that, I think Josh Reynolds is the guy that I'd probably be most scared of for like that deep fluke play, if you will. Courtland Sutton has more than 2 times more than any other targets on this Broncos offense. And the second most is a running back, Javonte Williams. So if you could stop Courtland Sutton and you can keep Bo Nix contained, which that last one's probably the one that I'm more fearful of, I think this is a win. Even with an inept offense so far going up against a really, really, really good defense, I think that's how you win. If you can take out Courtland Sutton and you can keep Bo Nix contained, I think they're going to be okay.
Dan, it wasn't until week 4 that Bo Nix actually threw a touchdown pass.
Not great, Bob.
Not great, Bob, no. But the moral of the story here is, as you put up the graphic, this is the coaching matchup right here. The Broncos defense has kept them in games, has essentially helped them win their last 4 games, or excuse me, not their last 4 games, but in the last 4 games that they've played, even with a 3-2 record, they have kept them in every single one of those games, and ultimately the reason that they won the games that they did. Greg Roman kind of alluded to it a little bit in his press conference as far as when the question was asked about, Justin Herbert having as many passing yards as he did, and it's not the Justin Herbert style of offense that we had seen previously. Were they going to lean on his arm when they needed to? And he said in so many different words that was coming. Again, I don't believe it's going to be this game that you're going to execute that, because
hell, I hope it is.
I mean,
sure.
Another one of Greg Roman's quotes that he said all the way back to training camp, Dan, was that they were going to prepare differently based on the opponent. Some days you're going to have to rely more on the running game. Absolutely. Other times you're going to have to rely on Justin Herbert's arm. We've seen a little bit of that. Remember the start of the Steelers game?
Mm-hmm.
Justin Herbert, extremely efficient. I like the way that they put together their first drive against Kansas City.
But okay, so that is an example, Jake. So for example, the Chargers went up against the Steelers, right? Everyone's saying, "Oh, but it was the Steelers' vaunted defense." The Steelers' defense is so good. What happened in the next game when the Colts played the Steelers? You got Joe Flacco balling out against the Steelers.
2 very different quarterbacks, because remember, Joe Flacco was not supposed to be playing in that game. It was Anthony Richardson who got knocked out. So you could say whatever you want, but I guarantee you the Pittsburgh Steelers did not expect to see Joe Flacco in that game. So a little bit of context with that. Here's some other context, Dan. And this is possibly, again, where the Chargers are going to win. As I said, they're going to have to get back to their brand of football, owning the trenches, getting the run game going, which they haven't had, because the Steelers and the Chiefs are ranked top 5 in rush defense. They're very good against the run.
Mm-hmm.
Broncos are still top 10, but they're 10th. I think that this is where you can possibly, again, context matters. You don't have Rashawn Slater or Joe Alt that's just going to cripple the inside of your offensive line. There is no Sam Mustipher in this game. We're not going back to that. We are back to the full strength of the starters. But collectively, as a starting group, you have to be able to run the ball better. You have to reinvigorate that offense, because that's going to then pace you for what you want to do with your offensive game plan. Dan, also, Gus Edwards may not be playing in this game. We talked about the difference in style between J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards. Gus Edwards is that guy who's going to be able to get you the short yardage, the power back. Why you didn't utilize him on that 4th and 1 in the Kansas City game is still beyond me. That's a whole different story for another day. But J.K. Dobbins, your explosive back. Okay, we've seen that. That's great. Kamani Vidal, Dan. If this is going to be the game to inject Kamani Vidal in, I would love to see this. Because not only do I think that he brings a little bit more of the similar type of juice that J.K. Dobbins brings to the table, but also in terms of the passing game, he could be utilized very, very well, which is still something that I'm waiting to see more of, especially when you have pressure being brought the way that it's brought on Justin Herbert.
Yeah, he could be. I think he could be used both out of the backfield and as a pass protector.
You need to keep these defenses honest. You need to have them be prepared for something different rather than a run, pass type of an offense. So not to say that you aren't utilizing your running backs, but utilize your running backs in a more creative way. That's not going to allow this defense to start pitting their ears back, have them coming on stunts. That's going to open things up that's going to open up holes for these running backs to get through. And in turn, you're running the clock, you're wearing down the defense, you're controlling the pace, you're protecting your quarterback. All of those things run through that. So you're going to have to wait a little bit longer for a Justin Herbert-like game that we've been used to for the past 3.5 years.
Here we go again.
You're going to have to wait. I'm sorry. Against this defense, Dan, if it was a different defense, I would have said, you know what? Maybe you retool and you go back to the drawing board and you say, yeah, we're going to put more on Justin Herbert's shoulders this weekend. And not to say that you're not going to have those situations where you're going to have to pass the ball. Obviously, you will. But against this defense, the way that they're playing right now, you're not going to see a game of 200 yards for Justin Herbert. Quentin Johnston, you're going to have to find ways. He's not going to, if you're going to utilize him, you better get him out in space over the middle of the field, because if you just have him running the deep patterns all day, Patrick Surtain is going to shut that down and take that away immediately.
So we'll get to the kind of the key player matchups here in a second, but I think this is kind of a big week / turning point for kind of the Greg Roman steam. Because if we see another offense inept,
yes,
that seat's gonna get warmer. And with the brain trust that this coaching staff has, there's really no excuse to do it again. And I understand this is a Broncos defense. I get all of that, but you can still impose your will and do unto others the way you want if you do it correctly. And the issue is, and I think sometimes Greg Roman gets a bad rap a little bit. A lot of this is because of, you can talk about play calling and play design and all that jazz, but so much of this offensive struggle has been because of the inability to gain yards on early downs. And conversely, back-breaking plays, back-breaking loss of yards at critical times. And so this Chargers offense just simply is not built to win in 1st and 15s, 2nd and 20s, 3rd and 19s. That's just not how they win. Give them a 2nd and 8, okay. But go back and look at those 2 losses and how many of those drives ended during possessions in which started at some point 1st or 2nd and long. That's why this team is losing.
Yes.
Because if they can get to manageable 2nd and 3rd downs, they can do what they want. but they've kind of been taken out of their scheme constantly because of miscues. Not because they've gotten beat for a sack, which has happened at times, but that's not why they're losing games, because it happens. But too often, Greg Roman's offense, the offensive line in particular, hell, Disley, you could add in there too. You've seen a lot of struggles with just execution, just fundamental execution on offense. So I think the coaching matchup, Jake, that's the one that I'm looking for. Vance Joseph, Greg Roman and company. Can we see a different offense this week? Now, is it going to be out high flying? Of course not. Like, I don't think so, maybe, but it could still be effective, and they could still execute their game plan in a way that would help them win this game. Because right now, their offense is the reason they are losing, period. And that can't happen. Like, it just can't happen when you have an offense led by Justin Herbert. So let's get to the player matchups, and then we'll get to the kind of predictions, bold of the like. In my opinion, I think the first one, Jake, is you have in the screen here, Jim Harbaugh with J.K. Dobbins kind of blurred out. The key player matchups is the running game by committee of this Chargers team versus a Broncos defensive front. Can the Chargers offense, led by their hopefully healthy offensive tackle and Joe Alt, give me one of them back, one of Alt or Slater, I think you can manage with help from tight ends. But can the running game get back to where they need to be? And so can we see J.K. Dobbins, or if Gus Edwards can't go, can we see Kamani Vidal step up? Those guys versus the defensive front, Nick Benito, like I think that's the part that we're going to have to see if they can be effective. And then on the Broncos side, I talked about Javonte Williams and Courtland Sutton. The defensive front for the Chargers, same thing. This is a big game again for the linebackers. The Chargers defensive front, I think I'm more concerned or more questions about can the linebackers, A, tackle, B, contain. If they can contain, which I'm so glad, in theory, we should have both Henley and we should have Junior Colson back. If they can tackle and contain both running back and quarterback, that's a big win. And lastly, for me, Jake, before I go to you, Ladd McConkey. I don't think Ladd McConkey is going to be on Pat Surtain that much since he's kind of more inside. But I'm not throwing to Pat Surtain much, which is why I think this is a big game for the slot receiver.
Yes. So
this could be a Ladd McConkey game. This could be a tight end game for the Chargers offense specifically, because there's a reason why every Chargers fan would love to have Pat Surtain on their team. And 31 other teams would as well. So stop Devontae Williams, Courtland Sutton, get Ladd McConkey cooking, and be able to establish an effective running game and stay ahead of the sticks. Recipe for success.
Defensively, Dan, you have to put the ball in Bo Nix's hands for the majority of this game. You have to find ways to take Javonte Williams out of this game. For majority of the season, the Chargers have done a decent job against the run. But you make a rookie quarterback playing in the fashion that Bo Nix is currently playing right now, one-dimensional, put the game on his shoulders. Defensively, you can go out there and you can win. One of the biggest issues that the Chargers have had over the past 2 weeks is getting off the field on third down. They cannot allow themselves to be getting in these third and short situations because majority of the time, those are situations that allows them to get to continue, opposing offenses to continue drives. Hell, you go back to the Pittsburgh game, it didn't even matter. It could be a 3rd and 15 or a 3rd and 22, and then it was undisciplined defenses that kept those drives going, which ultimately ended up losing you the game. So yes, you have to obviously play disciplined, but your game plan and your execution in terms of taking the running game away from Denver, putting the ball in Bo Nix's hands, and trying to make him beat you is a very, very simple formula. Now, Dan, offensively, again, the amount of questions that we have about this, and I think if we were talking about any lesser of a defense, there may not be as many. But it's seeing what we've seen over the last 6 quarters, essentially, from this offense, And for a number of different factors, whether we're talking game plan, injuries, what have you. We said that this bye week was a moment for Jim Harbaugh and company to look in the mirror in terms of things that need to be tweaked, reassessed, reevaluated. How are you going to come out of the bye week to ultimately make those things better? Now, do I think all of a sudden we're going to see a shift in the offensive philosophy of Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. If something's working, here's one thing that I could tell you about Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman. Especially offensively, if something's working, they're going to keep going. And they will keep doing it. So if you can get the running game back to where it was the first 2 weeks, it's going to be that type of a game. And they're going to run the defense off the field. They're going to try to. They're going to run as much as they can through J.K. Dobbins and whoever it is that's going to be alongside of him in that backfield. And why not? It's only going to help Justin Herbert out. Now, because this is the Denver Broncos defense, you're going to have certain situations where it's going to be a 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10, 3rd and 12. Let's just all get ready for it. We already know that it's all coming. What's going to be your execution in those type of situations? So outside of the simple run, pass game, you need to figure out different ways offensively to not only utilize your running backs, because believe it or not, you can use them more than just running the ball up the middle, but work the middle of the field. Figure out ways to work. Dan, you just said you're not throwing to Patrick Surtain.
Nope.
Okay, so even if you want to throw to Patrick Surtain, I don't believe that the results are going to be positive, even if you do. So, sure, would you love to see him sling it all over the field? Yeah. Is Denver's defense going to allow you to do it? No. Nor do I think that this offensive game plan is going to have them come out of the bye and do this. To your point, Ladd McConkey, yes, I think this is a great opportunity for him to work the middle of the field. If the Chargers are able to live in 3rd and short for the majority of this game, I think that they can win those matchups. 100%, I do think that they can win those matchups if they can do that from a standpoint of what happens on 1st and 2nd down. Mm-hmm. If you get into a situation in the Kansas City game where essentially every single one of your drives minus the first one, you're in deep trouble. You will be in deep trouble in this game.
Yep. Well, here we go, Jake. Split up or shut up time. So
on that positive note, let's transition to overall thinking.
I do hope, and Jake, you and I were talking about this offline earlier in the week, but you hear Greg Roman prior to the season starting talk about the effectiveness of his running game historically, and in talking about how it's not just that you have to be good at running, but you have to at least have the illusion that you're good at running. Both of those can be equally effective in affecting the opposing defense. I see similar for this Chargers offense in creating some breathing room underneath. The Chargers don't have to be great at passing deep, but they at least have to give the illusion that they will. I'm not throwing deep to Patrick Surtain. Let's be clear here. But if you had Patrick Surtain on the left side, and let's say you had, I don't know, McConkey or Davis, even if the play call, Jake, was DD or Ladidi, whichever one you want to talk to, Darius Davis or Ladidi McConkey, go run as fast as you can down the field, and I'm just going to chuck this ball as far as I can. You're not going to catch it. They're not going to catch it, but we're going to throw it 60 yards just so we can show them that we're going to try. Give them the illusion. That way you can get the defense to sit back a little bit. Otherwise, they're on their toes, and this is the same thing we saw last year. You got to figure out a way to give yourself some breathing room. If all you're doing is underneath stuff and running the ball, you don't think the opposing defense is like, sweet, I'm chilling. So you got to show a threat somehow. Even if it's one play that you're chucking to the stands, I don't care. Give the illusion. Show us one deep ball. Mass protect with 2 receivers. I don't care. Can we please see it? Do I predict it will happen? Probably not.
You probably shouldn't.
I probably would love to see something. But, Jake, predictions. Bold and game.
Dan, as you were talking right there, the Chargers just released their game status of everybody. Are you ready for this?
No, I'm not.
No, you're not. I guarantee you're not.
Oh, boy.
Questionable, Joey Bosa, Christian Fulton, Nick Neiman, Rashawn Slater, Dean Leonard. Okay. Out, Jasir Taylor, Gus Edwards, Asante Samuel Jr.
What was Asante before?
I was trying to remember because
I thought he was limited.
I think that he was limited, but I didn't think that there was any danger of him originally missing this game. So that's a little bit of a new one. It's a little bit of a new one. I'm just looking at the injury report here from yesterday. Dan, he was actually in full practice yesterday. He was limited on Wednesday. He was a full participant on Thursday.
That's new.
Wow.
But again, this is where I'm grateful for Joe Ortiz. Because if there's one position that I think this Chargers team has done a great job with depth, it is that kind of second/slot corner. And you've got Elijah Molden, who could play that versatile role. You've got Tarheeb Still, who I think is good at that already as a rookie, that can fill in those shoes. So that's a bummer for sure. But what you might lose in coverage by some, you might gain in tackling. You might gain in other ways, or it might not be as much of a loss. For example, if it was Christian Fulton, that to me is a bigger loss going up against any wide receiver one than losing their CB2. But yeah, that sucks. But Joey Bosa wasn't on there at all, so it sounds like he's a go.
But Joey Bosa is officially questionable.
Bosa's questionable.
As it stands for the game. Christian Fulton, questionable. Nick Neiman, obviously, getting him back from a special teams perspective is big. Rashawn Slater and Dean Leonard also questionable, but all indications are that you would have those guys come Sunday. And you talk about that Asante Samuel Jr. injury, obviously, I'm Jasir Taylor being out on top of that. So Tarheeb Still is now going to man the middle of the field. As you mentioned, Elijah Molden has that ability to play both outside and safety. You're probably going to see a lot more of Dean Leonard on the outside in terms of coverage, how they're going to mix that up. Joe Alton Jr. Colson officially off the injured list, Dan. So that's obviously a plus.
Yeah, and also Justin Herbert is off the injury list.
Yes.
Which you thought a whole fiasco when it first happened, like the week after, where they forced the NFL forced the Chargers to go back and put him back on the injury report. So the fact that he's not there now, that's a great thing. But Jake, remember when I warned you? We were talking about that everybody's going to get healthier going into the bye week. And I'm like, fluke things happen. You better knock on wood. And here we are, somehow. Asante Samuel Jr. with a shoulder injury, now out.
Well, I mean, I think in general, if you go back and you look at what the injury report was 2 weeks ago.
Yes, but I'm saying like weird things happen. All of a sudden, your starting corner is now out from a shoulder injury. But again, thankfully, they're not going up against a great offense to where if there was a team that you can lose your cornerback to, which you'd rather not do, this is probably that. So
after my injury report tangent, apologies, let me get back to my game prediction here. Normally with a 2-2 record going into week 6, you wouldn't necessarily call it a must win. But then you remember that the Chargers are in the AFC West. You remember that currently you stand 1-1 in the division and you're going up against a divisional opponent this week. Dan, if I'm being absolutely honest, this game terrifies me. The Chargers' offensive weapons do not scare the Denver Broncos, especially in the pass game. And why would they? Because they haven't terrified anybody through their first 4 games. They haven't given them reason to. Conversely, what are you going to learn after this bye week, both offensively and defensively? That's just the biggest cloud that's kind of hanging over this entire game. How do you expect this team to execute? Well, I'll tell you this. I would expect protection and run game to be better considering the personnel that you have back on the field in Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater. Mm-hmm. And as I've been talking plenty of weeks, for Greg Roman, for his offensive scheme to work, It means that your offense has to be out there producing, gaining the advantage, winning in the trenches. If the Chargers can get back to the way that they looked offensively during those first 2 weeks, I still think they could squeak out a close win. This is not going to be, I don't think this is a game that reaches 20 points from either team. I don't think it even goes above 13. But who's going to be the one that scores 13?
This might have to be a game in which the Chargers defense scores close to the same amount as the Chargers offense.
100%. You may see a touchdown from the defense and a touchdown from the offense, and that be it.
And a field goal, and like a 54-yard field goal. That's 17 points right there.
My heart is telling me, though, Dan, you have to win this game. Remember what you have in front of you, including the Broncos. The next 3 of your 4 games are on the road.
Mm-hmm.
You can't afford to go 1-2 in the division. You can't afford to drop down another game below the Kansas City Chiefs when they're on a bye week. You need to find a way to make up ground when they're not playing.
Both in the AFC West and the AFC division. Yeah.
Yes. And ultimately moving forward, whether it's this game or it's next week or the weeks after that, offensively, you have to get more in a rhythm in terms of how you're going to be executing, learning from your mistakes, and playing 4 quarters of offense where you're putting up points in the third and the fourth quarter. It's not going to be the easiest test to do that this week against the Denver Broncos. That's for sure.
Nope.
As I just said, it's going to be the 1st to 13.
Just win.
Honestly, this is more of a heart pick talking more than me just looking at it logistically of what's going to take place. But I'll say the Chargers barely get out of this against Denver, 13-10, and that's me being the most optimistic that I can say. Take from that what you will, and I know I didn't give it the best prop up and delivery when I said it, but until we get some of these questions answered, as it stands right now, the confidence level for this offense executing still remains to be seen.
So I think my bold prediction is going to be, I alluded to it before, but I do think that the Chargers defense scores. In fact, Jake, after this...
Oh, that's a relief. Woo!
Yes.
They score. Okay, good.
The Chargers defense scores.
Chargers defense scores. Okay.
Yes. In fact, why don't we run up back that giveaway?
If the Chargers defense scores a touchdown, we'll give another jersey giveaway?
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure.
Let's do it today.
Why not?
So that's my bold prediction. Chargers defense. You get the visual here of the Chargers defense all sitting there in the end zone after an interception, I believe. Maybe they can actually score. That'd be wonderful. And with that, I think they get to 20, and that's with the defensive score. So I'm going to go 20-13 Chargers. But it will be another week with a lot of questions. But you'd rather have questions after a win than a loss. So there's a lot of baggage with this game. And I think this is a lot heavier than maybe Chargers fans recognize at first thought. But this is going to be a big game. This is a big test. And this Chargers coaching staff expected to be 4-0 and are disappointed that they are not 4-0. So far, in my opinion, they have won the games they should win, and they lost the games that they, in theory, should lose. I think the Steelers defense, that's a tough win. Against the Chiefs team, we all chalk that up as a loss to begin the season. Generally speaking, this team is built to win the games they should and be competitive in the games that they shouldn't. This is a game they should win. That's why I see them winning. So 20-13 Chargers. Jake, anything else? We went a little long here today, but we did so with purpose.
I guess show me that you learned something.
Show me you learned something.
That would be my message.
Tobey Maguire. Do it in Tobey Maguire voice.
Show me that you learned something. You mean Jerry Maguire, not Tobey Maguire, by the way.
Oh yeah, dang it. Okay, do it like Spider-Man. Go ahead. Show me you learned something. Okay.
Yeah, that's how he would do it.
Oh man. All right, well, this is fun. I'm glad we're back to doing football stuff again. This is great. Chargers football coming this Sunday in Denver from Mile High. Thank you all so much for tuning in. For Jake Hefner, you can find him at Jake D. Hefner. Myself, you can find at Dan W. Sports. Again, be sure to hit that like and subscribe on YouTube. And follow us anywhere you get your podcasts and Twitter handles. Go check us out. Leave a review if you can. But until next time, we'll talk to you next on Chargers Unleashed.